everyone, today I'm going to be trying out Jack Richeson watercolors and brushes for the first time. I'm going to be trying and testing them out using various techniques, some which include the wet on wet technique, the wet on dry technique, and of course I'm going to try some flowers because I just love incorporating flowers into my pieces. Now, the first thing I noticed when I started swatching these was that the colors were nice and creamy and the paint went on really smooth. Now, I could definitely tell that this paint was very nice, very high quality, and the brush really helped with putting the paint on very smooth. This brush that I'm using is called a flat brush, and it held a lot of water and held a lot of pigment as well. Since my page is slightly curved, I did end up having water that collected on certain sides and made the pigment distribute kind of unevenly, but that's not their fault, that's just how my book was made. Something I was happy to find was that as I swatched these, their white was a true white. And what I mean by a true white is that some watercolor paint sets that I've encountered, their white is on the creamy side and not a true actual white. So I was really glad to see that. Overall, I'm so happy with these colors because they're very smooth and creamy, very vibrant, and so pigmented. Considering that my sketch paper is made of drawing paper and not true watercolor paper, these colors soaked in really well, and it definitely showed how vibrant they were. In fact, I noticed that they were actually a lot more vibrant than my own watercolors that I use all the time. If I had to give these colors names, I would name the black a charcoal black, but I'm sure if I added more pigment to it, I could probably make it a lamp black. I would say that this is a Prussian blue. I forgot to let the darker green soak long enough, so it looked about the same shade as the lighter one, but I will say that I think it looks like a sap green. But I did notice a distinct difference between the yellows and the reds because I did let them soak long enough. If I had to give these names, I'd call the darkest shade a golden yellow and the lighter shade a cad yellow. For time's sake, I'm going to move on from the images of the swatches while I open this, but I will keep describing what I would name the colors. I would name the purple as a kind of magenta, and I would also call the brown a burnt umber. And the last colors would be cadmium reds, and finally chrome orange. The Jack Richeson brushes I'm using are the flat synthetic brush, the round brush, and there is a gray matte brush that was also included. During this review, I'm not going to be using this brush included in the palette, mostly because I already have Jack Richeson brushes included that are about the same size, but I definitely do think that they would make a really good travel brush whenever you want to take this palette on the go. This is also a great palette because there's so much paint, considering that you need very little pigment to make a picture with watercolors. I would definitely recommend buying this, and I think this would be a great palette to travel with because you would most likely not run out of the colors for a really long time. Something to note about Jack Richeson products is that they do not sell directly to customers, but their products are sold in retail stores like Michael's and Hobby Lobby, and I found this set on Amazon and it was only $8. Anyway, back to the review. I started off by painting on their watercolor postcards, and I found that these were really convenient because they weren't too big, but they weren't too small either. I think you could carry them around anywhere. If you wanted to paint in the park, you could just take them with you and paint on them, and you can also send them to your friends. Something I also really loved about the paper was that it soaked in the pigments, and the paint glided onto the paper nice and smooth. I was really happy to receive their round brush. I really like round brushes because they're thin at the tip and they start to become wider the more it's pressed down, which is perfect for the petals of the flowers I'm painting right now. Another thing I really loved about the round brush was that it held a lot of water, which their flat brush did as well. The round brush itself helped the paint go on nice and smooth, and the brush really made it easy to control watercolors, which usually you can't. They kind of have a mind of their own, so I was really happy to see that I did have some sort of control over where the pigment was going. The Gray Matters brush that they provided was nice and firm, which was really good because when I was doing the details, it didn't buckle or anything. It was really easy to control and put fine details in. And by fine details, I mean little things like stems or branches, things like that. And overall, their brushes, I loved their brushes. They all held a lot of water, they held a lot of pigment, they helped the paint go on nice and smooth on the paper, and they're also pretty affordable prices considering how good of quality they are. I will say the flat synthetic brush is $23, but that being said, it definitely is worth getting nice brushes for your watercolors. And once you buy 2 or 3 brushes that you absolutely need, you will not need to buy any more for the rest of your art career unless you kind of want them, I suppose. But in all reality, you don't need more brushes than necessary. I would say get a flat brush, maybe a round brush, and then a small thin brush that can put in nice details like the Gray Matters brush. The technical name for small thin brushes like that are called detail round brushes, and they're essentially meant for details. It's in the name. So for example, you can add a little hair or a little branch or something very, very small. You can add some highlights, you can add some reflecting light in the eyes of a portrait. That's essentially what a detail round brush is for. See what I'm doing right now, I'm adding little stems and some details to the leaves. Now, on another note, I am going to focus on the palette. On the palette, on either ends, there is a white portion where it has no paint pans or anything. I think that is the place where you would mix colors if you would like. Now, in this video, I'm not going to be mixing any colors, mostly for time's sake, and another reason is simply I have a lot of colors and I usually don't have to mix colors, so I am not used to that, but I think once I do get the hang of it, I would definitely use that area to mix different colors I would want, like a darker green, or maybe mix the reddish pink and the white to make a lighter pink. Now, as I finish this piece here, I'm just going to go over a general, not a rule, I would say a tip. I have a tendency to use too much water, and because of that, during this process, it took a really long time to dry. And also, if you use too much water, it can cause your paper to buckle. Here, I didn't need to use a lot of water because I was doing fine details, but in my next pieces, I used a lot of water, especially for the wet on wet technique, and it caused my paper to buckle, which means it causes the paper to wrinkle from too much water on it. Now, I will say the next 2 pieces I do the paper buckles, but that also could be because it's drawing paper in my journal, not real watercolor paper. The reason why I decided not to use the postcards after this was because I ended up really liking them, so I wanted to save them for really important things, like if I wanted to send a little thank you card or something to my friends. Now, as I'm finishing this postcard, I'm going to move on to my next piece, which I'm using the wet on dry technique. The wet on dry technique is pretty much what it sounds like. You are going to use wet paint on dry paper. I wanted to do this just to see the raw, vibrant colors. Now, while I'm doing this, I'm just going to explain what the wet on wet technique is. The wet on wet technique is where you put the wet media, which is the watercolors, you put the watercolors on pre-wetted paper. I use this technique frequently because when I'm doing the wet on wet technique, the water can dilute the color and make it either lighter or more opaque. So currently in this piece I am doing, this is the wet on dry technique, but I will show you in a minute the wet on wet technique and why I love it so much. On the next page, I did the wet on wet technique while I waited for this piece to dry, because after it was done drying, I was going to go outline it with fine point Sharpie. Now when you see me use my wet flat brush across the ocean, it's to essentially pull up and drag the paint so it blends out better. Now the first thing I noticed on the next piece when I did the wet on wet technique was how nicely the paint spread out when I put it on. Something I was also really happy about was when I put the paint on the paper using the wet on wet technique, the colors still stayed as vibrant as I wanted them to. They didn't fade out. So I was really happy about that because usually my watercolors will do that. But reiterating what I said earlier, many times during this video, I was really impressed with how vibrant these colors came out. I definitely wasn't expecting it, not because I expected the colors to come out bad, but simply because my colors have never come out as vibrant as these ones have. Originally, I was going to paint a landscape and have the reddish orange yellow background as a sunset of some sort, but in the end I decided to keep it as it was because I didn't want to do anything to it because I just thought this piece was so beautiful. Now, as this video is coming close to an end, I'm gonna highlight the main points. I thought all of the brushes were really nice. They held a lot of water, a lot of pigment. They helped the paint go really smooth on the paper. And speaking of the paper, the postcards they provided, it soaked the paints up really well and they were really nice. And finally, the paints, I was really impressed with how much paint was in there, how vibrant the colors were, how cheap and affordable the prices were. I would definitely recommend this for beginner and intermediate artists. And personally, these almost look like professional watercolors to me with how vibrant they are. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to take it easy.